Good afternoon. My name is Gaston Alonso, and I am the director of the Ethel R. Wolf Institute for the Humanities at Brooklyn College. I am very excited to welcome you to today's event, the Diminished Citizenship of U.S. Citizen Children of Undocumented Migrants, a conversation between Lori Gallegos, Associate Professor of Philosophy at Texas State University, and Matthew Lindauer, Assistant Professor of Philosophy at Brooklyn College and Assistant Professor of Philosophy and Psychology at the City University of New York's Graduate Center. This is the last in a three-part series on the philosophy of immigration that the Wolf Institute has proudly sponsored this semester. It has been an amazing series. It has been substantive, engaging, and vitally important. So I want to take a moment to give a special thanks to Professor Matt Lindauer and Professor Daniel Campos from the Department of Philosophy for putting the series together and gifting us this wonderful opportunity to learn by engaging with the speakers. I also want to give a special thanks to Jesus Perez from the Immigrant Student Success Office and to his team for partnering with us to sponsor the series, as well as for the excellent work that they do with our immigrant students. So thank you, Matt, Daniel, and Jesus. Let me also thank the other sponsors of the series, the Departments of Anthropology, of English, History, Judaic Studies, Political Science, Puerto Rican and Latinx Studies, and Sociology, the programs in Caribbean Studies in Religion, and in Urban Sustainability, the Center for the Study of Brooklyn, and the Haitian Studies Institute at Brooklyn College. This event tonight is being recorded, and it will be posted on the Ethel R. Wolf Institute's YouTube channel. And with that, let me introduce Professor Matthew Lindauer, who will host today's event. Matt, it's all yours.
Thank you, Gaston. And yes, it's really an honor to be hosting this series. We've come to our last session, and we're very proud of the speaker who introduced the moment being willing to talk to us about her really important and innovative research. So thanks again to the many academic departments and to the Wolf Institute and the Immigrant Student Success Office on campus for co-sponsoring this event. It's a real honor to be a part of it. I'd also like to say to all who celebrate Eid Mubarak, and hope that your month of Ramadan has been wonderful and fulfilling. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for tonight, Professor Lori Gallegos, Associate Professor of Philosophy at Texas State University. We picked her as a very promising and important young scholar working on immigration justice issues and on empathy, many important philosophical concepts that relate to the philosophy of immigration. So today, she'll be speaking with us about the diminished citizenship of U.S. citizen children of undocumented migrants. And I can't wait to hear what she has to say about this topic and to discuss with her. We'll have Q&A after I ask a few questions of her. So please, Professor Gallegos, take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. Thank you to Matt and Daniel and Gaston and all of the sponsors and everybody who took time to be here today. I'm really honored to be here and looking forward to our conversation today. I have a slideshow, so I'm going to share my screen. All right, how's that looking? Good, okay. So in 2007, I started working in an immigration law firm, and my main job was to prepare what are sometimes referred to as unlawful presence waivers. Most of the time, these involved migrants who entered the US illegally or who overstayed a visa, but who ended up marrying US citizens or legal permanent residents. Because they married a US citizen, the migrant could be eligible to apply for permanent residency. But since they had a prior unauthorized entry or overstay, they were first subject to a punishment. They are barred from entering the US, usually for a period of 10 years. In other words, in order to apply for the immigration benefits to which they otherwise qualify, they risk being sent back to their home country and separated from their family in the US for a decade. Our government currently recognizes that, not surprisingly, this can have a really negative impact on the intending immigrants, a U.S. citizen spouse or children or elderly parents. And not wanting to subject its own citizens to this, the U.S. has a policy allowing intending immigrants to apply to have the 10-year bar waived if they can demonstrate that their U.S. citizen spouse or children will suffer extreme hardship as a result of the 10-year bar. There is an implicit ethical view that informs this policy, and so I'm going to break it down. The first premise is that the ability to sustain close ties with one's loved ones is essential to well-being. These ties frequently exist among people of mixed immigration status. So some are citizens and some are non-citizens. The 10-year bar on reentry threatens the close ties between citizens and their undocumented loved ones. So we could conclude that the 10-year bar undermines the basic well-being of U.S. citizens. A just government typically aims to avoid systemically harming its own citizens. And so the unlawful presence waiver is basically a policy that overrides an unethical policy in the case that it produces hardship. And I think that this argument is sound, and I want to take it seriously. I want to closely examine the idea that close ties with our loved ones are essential to well-being. And I want to think about how this might apply to other immigration policies. It's not just the 10-year bar that undermines the well-being of U.S. citizens. Indeed, as the attorney who I used to work for once said, immigration policy is family separation policy. Immigration policy in which deportation and the threat of deportation loom generate a variety of harms and disadvantages to U.S. citizens. So in today's talk, I focus on some of the harms that the U.S. citizen children of undocumented migrants face. The share of people who are U.S. citizens by birth, but who have parents that are undocumented is pretty sizable. 4.4 million U.S. citizen children under the age of 18 lived with at least one undocumented parent as of 2018.
Laurie, sorry to interrupt, but is there a way to advance the slides? It seems like they're stuck on the first slide for us. Are they going along for you?
They are going along for me. It says my screen sharing is paused.
Okay. Should we start and stop?
How's that?
Okay.
That looks better now.
Yes.
Great.
Perfect.
Thank you for letting me know. I was just going to go on and on. Okay, so 93% of young children of immigrants to the U.S. are U.S. citizens. And this was important for me because when I was searching the data about the experiences of children of undocumented migrants, a lot of the data didn't specify whether those children were themselves U.S. citizens. But since 93% of them are, we can assume that the data that applies to children of undocumented migrants in general, that a very, very large percentage of those are going to be U.S. citizen children. And so the data is still, I think, really relevant to supporting the case that I'm going to try and make here. Did the slide change? Good. Okay. So my argument today is that this group, the U.S. citizen children of undocumented migrants, often don't receive the benefits of citizenship that those who are born to U.S. citizen parents enjoy. And so I'm going to make this case in 3 sections. First, I want to show that the way we experience citizenship is influenced by our important relationships. Then I'm going to offer some evidence that the children of undocumented migrants are subject to harms and disadvantages as compared to the children of U.S. citizens. And lastly, I want to show that these disadvantages constitute a form of diminished citizenship. So I'm going to start with thinking about this idea of social ties being essential to well-being. The U.S. citizen children of undocumented migrants experience a variety of disadvantages relative to children whose parents are U.S. citizens. This disparity can be partly explained by the fact that undocumented migrants themselves fare worse overall compared to U.S. citizens. Because of the many ways in which children are dependent on their parents, they're subject to the myriad harms and diminished opportunities that their parents are subject to. In fact, I want to show that the very way these children experience their own citizenship is influenced by these non-sheddable social relationships. To explain this idea, I turn to the work of feminist care ethicist Eva Kate. There she is with her daughter, Sesha. Kate explains that close dependency relations are incorporated into the very identity of those who are part of the relationship. The relationship between the child and their primary caregiver is constitutive of the self of both the child and the caregiver, because the very preservation and development of the self, as well as our self-understanding, depends on this other. Think, for instance, the way in which becoming a parent can dramatically reconstitute one's world. Many of one's most important cares and concerns come to be oriented around being a parent, what one notices as they move through the world, what one dreams about. The very chemicals in one's body change in response to one's child. Even more obviously, think also about the deep ways in which a child's way of seeing the world and themselves, their tendency to form certain kinds of relationships, and their ability to realize different possibilities for their life is shaped by their relationship with their primary attachment figures. For people in these relationships, the other person is so essential to who one is that, in an important sense, one would no longer be oneself accepting of this relationship. Kate explains, clearly then, whomsoever you relate to in these crucial ways, that individual is incorporated into your own self-identity. If you're the vulnerable dependent, it is this individual and her relationship to you that forms the very ground of your being. At least that's how a young dependent would experience it. Again, it's not that another cannot perform the tasks that make up the repertoire of caring activities. But when the relationship forged through dependency is disrupted and different actors are substituted, a relational conception of the self would predict a disturbance in one's self-understanding, as well as a rupture in relationships that cannot always be mended. Kate's central point is that there's more at stake in dependency relationships than taking care of another person. The relationships are non-sheddable insofar as they are at the foundation for self-understanding, and the individuals within them are non-substitutable. Appreciating the importance of this relationship helps us to understand first why separation from one's parents because of immigration enforcement is more than just painful. It is shattering. It's not merely to be estranged from a loved one. It is, to use Kate's word, to lose the very ground of your being. It also deepens our understanding of why U.S. citizen children tend to fare worse when their parents are undocumented. I think that highlighting the importance of the ties between U.S. citizen children and their undocumented migrant parents is significant because it challenges the tendency to conceive of the populace in terms of a bright line distinction between citizens and non-citizens. The idea is beautifully conveyed by artist Yemi Cambron in her work called Family Portrait. About this work, she explains, I created Family Portrait as a series of individual portraits of my family to highlight the complexity of mixed status immigrant families. Here you don't know the citizenship status of any of the family members. Our immigration status determines which documents we're allowed to have, and those documents in turn determine our access to opportunities. In Family Portrait, these documents are ever present in the background and a permanent fixture in the back of the subject's mind. So words from interviews with each of these family members form the text that you can see that appears behind each person's face. A component of each person's story is demonstrated by their documents through phrases like not valid for re-entry to the US, not evidence of US citizenship, card expires. I intentionally made the documents appear as ghost-like layers in order to not overtake the portraits and their stories, because these documents and their limitations do not define us as human beings. But I created individual portraits to reflect the reality that we can be separated and that family togetherness is a fragile state. Though there are limits to what I can do to keep us from being separated, Family Portrait will always be exhibited as a series of 6 portraits, shoulder to shoulder, because families belong together. In many practical contexts, given interpenetrating ties of love and care and obligations, the bright line distinction between citizen and non-citizen doesn't always matter. It's not to say that the US citizen children experience the same disadvantages as their undocumented parents. It does imply, however, that their experience of their own citizenship depends on the way that their closest loved ones experience theirs. If a mother is deported from the US, that may mean that her children don't enter the US either, regardless of whether they're citizens. In this sense, the children have been de facto deported. One might be a US citizen, but lack the ability, practically speaking, to exercise their US citizenship. So I turn now in section 2 to presenting some evidence of the many ways in which children of immigrants are disproportionately subject to harms to their well-being. First, children of immigrants are more likely to have fair or poor health than children of US-born parents. 7% of young children of immigrants are reported to be in fair or poor health by their parents, as compared to 3% of children with US-born parents. Undocumented pregnant people often don't receive the same prenatal care that US citizens do. By law, undocumented migrants are barred from receiving public assistance, including Medicaid. So many people have reduced access to health facilities, and many undocumented migrants wait until late in the pregnancy to seek prenatal care. Once they do seek care, they have a higher risk profile, sometimes due to poor communication with their healthcare providers and to a lower rate of medical interventions. Well, these disadvantages to health continue into childhood. Young, low-income children of migrants are twice as likely to be uninsured as those of US-born parents. A lack of insurance obviously hinders healthy growth and development, and it also threatens a family's financial stability. Even though children who are US citizens are eligible for health coverage through Medicaid and CHIP, which is Children's Health Insurance Program, the disparities in enrollment remain. Researchers suggest that this is because the rules of eligibility are confusing. People are worried about how this might affect their ability to become US citizens. They're worried about being reported to immigration authorities. And some families are intimidated by interaction with public agencies because of language and cultural barriers. Fear of deportation also has an impact on the health of migrants and their children in a more direct sense. One study indicates that the stress of pregnant people related to fear of deportation appears to be linked to worse health in babies. There was a worksite raid in 2008 in Postville, Iowa. It was the single largest immigration raid in U.S. history that was located to a single site, and it was tied to premature and underweight births, complications that put babies at risk for infant death or long-term health problems. Researchers found that babies born to Latina mothers in Iowa, within 37 weeks of the raid, were 24% more likely to be underweight compared to births over the same amount of time 1 year earlier. The increased risk was not evident in babies born to non-Latina white mothers in Iowa. The socioeconomic disadvantages experienced by the children of undocumented migrants are significant too. Poverty is a major predictor of negative child outcomes, and rates of poverty are generally higher among children of migrants. Over half, 56% of young children of migrants are low-income households, as compared to 40% of children of non-immigrants. As one would expect, the children of migrants are substantially more likely to experience food and housing-related hardship. So you can see on the chart, the blue bars represent children of immigrants, and the gray bars represent children of US-born parents. And children of immigrants have significantly higher food-related problems. They're more likely to live in crowded conditions and more likely to be in households that most of the income goes towards meeting basic needs. One contributing factor, again, is that parents might be reluctant to approach publicly funded institutions for services, even though their children are eligible. As a result, children of migrants use public benefits less often than children of US-born parents, even though they have higher rates of economic hardship. They're twice as likely to receive low-income children with US-born parents are twice as likely to receive food stamps and more than twice as likely to receive TANF than young low-income children of immigrants. Problems related to socioeconomic status are exacerbated by the prospect of deportation of a parent. The deportation, arrest, or detention of a household member disrupts economic stability. One study found that families lost 40 to 90% of their income, an average of 70%, within 6 months of a parent's immigration-related arrest. The ability to afford housing also becomes more tenuous following the deportation of a family's financial provider. A 2016 study found that deportations exacerbate rates of foreclosure among Latinos by removing income earners. The study also showed that counties that authorize immigration enforcement collaboration between local police and ICE had higher foreclosure rates among Latinos. So in general, immigration enforcement is linked to higher poverty rates of US citizen children who have parents that are undocumented. Education is another area in which these children experience setbacks. One reason is that immigration enforcement has a negative impact on student achievement in schools. Educators surveyed in 2017 reported several concerns related to immigration enforcement, including student absences, declines in academic performance, and less involvement from parents. 84% of educators said students from immigrant families expressed concerns about immigration enforcement while at school. And fear about enforcement can also lead students to avoid completing the federal application for student aid, the FAFSA, because they think they're not eligible or they don't want to report their parents' income or give any information about their parents to the federal government. And so they are missing out on financial support that would allow them to pursue higher education. With regard to mental health, as many as 500,000 U.S. citizen children experienced the deportation of at least one parent from 2011 to 2013. It should come as no surprise. The deportation of a parent or the threat of deportation undermines a child's well-being. Research in the field of psychology indicates the significant and detrimental impacts of immigration enforcement on mental health. Numerous studies indicate that immigration enforcement and even the threat of deportation affects children's mental health and long-term development. We only need to learn about a couple of these studies to get a sense of the severity of the harms. A 2010 study found that most children whose parents had been arrested by immigration-related arrests specifically, had experienced at least 4 adverse behavioral changes in the 6 months following the arrest. They cried or were afraid more often. They changed their eating or sleeping habits, or they were more anxious, withdrawn, clingy, angry, or aggressive. Since late 2016, doctors have been studying the impacts of family separation on children, and they've reported having seen more children exhibiting stress and anxiety-related behavioral changes, including symptoms of toxic stress, which is a kind of prolonged activation of the stress response system that can disrupt the development of the brain architecture and other organ systems and increase the risk for stress-related disease and cognitive impairment well into the adult years. Children are also at a greater risk of developing chronic mental health conditions that include depression and PTSD, as well as physical conditions such as cancer, stroke, diabetes, and heart disease. A 2020 study of adolescents in Atlanta, Georgia, found that the detention or deportation of a family member was associated with higher rates of suicidal thought, alcohol use, and aggression. So that was a lot of very heavy information about how I think it's quite clear that the research shows that the well-being of children of undocumented migrants is substantially worse off than that of children who are born to U.S. citizen parents. But I think that this presents us with a little bit of a puzzle. U.S. citizen children of undocumented migrants have equal access to all of the rights and protections as any other citizen under the law. Nevertheless, they don't in practice obtain the full bundle of goods that accompany citizenship for more privileged citizens. So to wrap my mind around this discrepancy, I turned my attention to the work of feminist philosopher Dimut Bubek, and her scholarship examines the distinction between thick versus thin conceptions of citizenship. Now, typically when political scientists talk about thick and thin citizenship, they talk about the ways that citizens experience their obligations to the nation. But Bubek was concerned with the way that the nation meets the needs of citizens. So the extent to which citizens feel themselves included and a part of a nation. So Bubek explains that in general, thinner conceptions of citizenship are typically preoccupied with the principles of rights, liberty, autonomy, and equality. In contrast, theorists utilizing thicker conceptions of citizenship are much more interested in the actual functioning of political communities and the conditions that have to be met to allow them to flourish. And it's from this type of considerations that the nature of citizenship is then derived. In other words, social inequalities can result in some people having more opportunities to exercise their citizenship than others. For instance, if women are expected to do a vast majority of a society's unpaid care work, they'll have less opportunity to participate in the public sphere. If there's a class of people with ample leisure time because of the relegation of labor to a different class, the laboring class will likewise have less opportunity for political participation. We can expect then that the disadvantaged groups would have less political influence, less power to secure their interests. And in this sense, they're less able to exercise their citizenship than more privileged groups. I think that we can apply the notions of thin and thick approaches to citizenship to the experiences of children of immigrants. Bubeck explains that typically the methodologies of inquiry about citizenship associated with the thick conception utilize a bottom-up inquiry into the interrelations between the political, social, and individual life in a political community and their import for citizenship. So the previous section, which presented all sorts of data about the actual conditions that children of undocumented migrants face, kind of represents this sort of bottom-up approach by identifying the way that they are less likely to flourish than other citizens do. So they're disadvantaged with respect to bodily and mental health, education, social status, and a sense of their and their families' security and belonging. So I want to conclude by noting that these disadvantages are produced by the state. Through the law, the state determines whose presence is unauthorized. It plays a role in determining how immigration status will impact day-to-day functioning, such as the ability to get a driver's license or to feel safe to drive to the supermarket. The state also determines the mechanisms for enforcing immigration law and the extent to which enforcement will be pursued. The state thus produces the circumstances that generate the disadvantages that the children of undocumented migrants face. The state produces fear, the fear that leads families to make less use of public benefits to which they're entitled, the fear that leads children to perform worse in school and to avoid filing for federal student aid for higher education. Through family separation via deportation, the state contributes to the diminished bodily health, emotional health, education, and economic stability of the children of immigrants. So these children are formally included in political membership, and they have all the rights and protections that are afforded to them in accordance with the law. They're fully citizens in the thin sense. But when we continue to consider the myriad state-sanctioned barriers to well-being that they confront because of immigration policy, it becomes apparent that they don't experience citizenship in the same way as those who are born to U.S. citizen parents. They experience a diminished form of citizenship. They're citizens in the thin sense, but not fully citizens in the thick sense. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Everyone's clapping, and I see that we not only have a lot of participants, but we have a whole course with us, taught a sociology of education course, taught by Professor Fox. So everyone will be taking your questions, start to think about some questions as I discuss a few things that came to mind with Professor Gallegos. So this is super important. It's important that philosophers of immigration come to realize that the way in which we treat non-citizens and outsiders, quote unquote, often has deep resonances and implications for how our citizens are treated. So one thing I wanted to just ask you about is like how you kind of came to have some of these insights about this. So one thought that keeps emerging in our series is that there are certain limitations to a certain kind of liberal individualist paradigm of thinking about whether it's justice or political philosophy. So one thing you might think is that that paradigm has always done a bad job of thinking about themes that feminist theorists have emphasized of dependency and care, that we're not just isolated individuals, right? That our outcomes, our happiness, our life projects deeply depend on how other people are doing, some of whom we might be dependent on and some of whom may be dependent on us. So is that a major influence on you? Are there other influences that you might want to draw attention to or draw our audience's attention to?
Thanks so much for the question. That's absolutely at the heart of the project. I'm looking for a way to articulate that that well-being is shared, that that ethics requires that we understand the extent to which selves are dependent on their ability to be, on people's ability to be with their loved ones. And a lot of this intuition comes from personal experience. I made the case about US citizen children because I think it's the strongest case that people who are totally dependent on their immigrant parents. But I think that the case could also be made for other loved ones and other dependents. I have an aunt in Mexico who has Down syndrome. And when my grandmother passed away, there was nobody to take care of her. And so my dad drove down to Mexico to try and get her a B visa, a visitor's visa, so that he could make sure that she was taken care of while he looked for ways to get her better situated so that she would have another caregiver in Mexico. But as soon as he went to the consulate, the officer took one look at her and denied the immigrant visa because they said that she would be a burden on the state. And it's her very vulnerability that made it essential for my father to bring her to the US. But it was that vulnerability that made her ineligible to come to the US. And it was shattering for my father. She died shortly after because she basically withered away without care. So that and my experience seeing families over and over again through my work as a immigration paralegal really made clear that every kind of hardship from family separation is a sort of extreme hardship when people love each other.
Thank you for sharing that personal story, and I think it's super important that perspectives of people for whom a lot is at stake in immigration decisions and policies are taken into account in discussing justice and ethics around immigration. I think for too long, you see people who really clearly don't really have any experience with, to use a phrase from Professor Campos's work, like loving immigrants, being in close relationships with immigrants. There's this kind of, I can name names, but we don't need to do that here. This treatment of immigrants as strangers, when in many cases immigrants are our family members, our neighbors, our friends, our romantic partners, and that's a very important thing to kind of get past, I think, if we're going to make progress on these issues. So one other thing that I wanted to invite you to talk about, and then I'll hand things over to Q&A, is whether any of this relates to your work on empathy. So you have a new article, I guess, forthcoming in the kind of premier feminist journal, feminist philosophy journal, Hypatia, where you talk about the extent to which empathy can help with intergroup solidarity. And there's this huge debate, as many of you will know, books like Against Empathy by Paul Bloom and others, where or work showing that, our empathy, people like Paul Slovic in psychology, that, empathy is this very limited resource. It tends to focus on one individual. We need something, something stronger if we're going to tackle really serious societal problems. And I take it that one of the important distinctions that you're introducing in that article is between what you call transitory empathy, which is kind of like experienced at a passing moment in time. And on the other hand, which you can imagine audience might not be as helpful for sustained social problems, versus what you call accretionary empathy, which is kind of developed over an extended period of time. So I just wanted to invite you, maybe you are drawing these distinctions, maybe these are separate parts of your work, but do you think that when we try to convince people to take these lessons to heart, besides the figures and the really important data that you showed us, we're trying to appeal to like the broader public or the global community, do you think something like your distinction between transitory and accretionary empathy could be of use?
Well, I hope that that talking about the experiences of immigrants and their loved ones is informative and contributes to the building of a kind of empathy that leads to solidarity. Sometimes I worry that if a person doesn't realize that they are us, they can't be convinced through rational argumentation. But I guess I think gotta try. I don't know. I'm appealing to the argumentation by trying to show like a kind of ontology, a kind of way in which, by talking about how selves are not able to be distinguished from their relations of dependency, to somehow get at the experience of having a loved one separated from you. So I guess that's a kind of roundabout way of saying they're connected. I'm not totally sure like that they aim at the same thing, but definitely there's a link there.
Thanks, that's very helpful. Well, I want to invite our audience members to ask some questions. So if you would please use the little hand raising icon, that would help us out a lot. Okay, so the first hand was from Mojubailo Okome. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Feel free to correct me. But can you ask your question? Yeah, it looks like you're unmuted. Please go ahead.
So this is Mojubailo Okome, and I think you get a B- in terms of my the pronunciation of my name.
Thank you for helping me then. Thanks.
I did enjoy this presentation, but I think that the problem is that the bureaucratic systems for managing immigration are soulless and lack compassion. And then, in terms of we and they, the lines that they draw are very hard and very unbending. They're very strict and unbending, and also very disrespectful when they engage people. I come from Nigeria, and things are so hard in terms of people being able to secure visas that people actually go to church and pray and they fast. You have your student visa, right? And you want to go, your student, your F1, you want to go for a visa, you have to go to church and pray and fast so that, the immigration people would give you a visa. And if you don't have a certain amount of money in the bank, which is a lot in terms of the salaries that Nigerians earn, you're actually not going to be given a visa. People are treated like they're criminals trying to, come here just to get an education, and forget about you want to come and visit. You have to be wealthy in order to be able to secure a visa. And then you get a facilitator and they charge you money. So then when it comes to compassionate grounds, I'm asked a lot to come and give testimony, as an expert. And, I don't think there's any interest in compassion or empathy. And the barriers that people have to meet in order to prove that they're deserving, they're so high that hardly anybody makes it. And people are in jail just for trying to sneak into the country, or being apprehended at airports without the right visa. And sometimes they're trying to escape from, traumatic events and things and, political persecution. So it would be good if we live in a world where the people who make these decisions read your work and they say, oh my God, this is what we should do. And they start doing it. But that's not the world we live in. And so how do we manage this? Knowing that, there are children who are, in these situations that you describe, whose lives are being just torn apart just by their being, So, how does this get dealt with? Who does the dealing with it? Are there any facilities that help these children in a really robust and, because it's not a one-off that you go, you listen to the child and you say, oh, I'm sorry, and then it's finished. So who takes care of the children?
Thank you so much for your comments and your question. I completely agree with you that the system is completely dehumanizing, and oftentimes the cases come down to the decision of an officer whose conclusion is quite final. And if they don't determine that you meet a criteria, even a rather subjective criteria like suffering extreme hardship, then that's the outcome of your life. I am thinking that philosophers don't necessarily make the kind of social change that activists make. We need activists, but in terms of what my work could accomplish, I hope it would accomplish what it's doing right now. Bringing all of us together to have a conversation so that those of us who cared about immigration will care a little bit more and be a little bit more informed, and little by little act in greater solidarity for a more just system. I agree with you that those who are not interested in empathy probably won't be reached.
Thank you for the question and for that answer. Okay, our next question is from Sergio Gallegos, Ordorica, please.
Thank you, Matthew. Hi, Lori. Great to see you. I really like the paper. So I do have not so much of a question, but rather a suggestion to help you further the argument, which I completely agree with. So in addition to the feminists that you cited, another scholar that you might want to take a look is a German political scientist. Her name is Brigitte Geisel. And she has actually a series of articles in which she argues that citizenship is way more than just basically being able to participate in electoral processes and to engage in political processes. It involves basically being part of a community and being able, as a result of this, to participate basically in community life and to derive basically benefits from this community, from being part of a community. So I would strongly suggest that you take a look at her work.
Thank you so much. That sounds right up my alley.
Yeah.
Very helpful. I love these interdisciplinary conversations, partly because of all the new references and things that we can get from each other. So thanks for that. Professor Fox has a question, or maybe your class. Please go ahead. I'm asking you to unmute. If you can't, let's try to get your audio. Oh, getting funny sounds, unfortunately. I wonder if you could type the question into the chat and then I could read it for you. Would that be possible if the microphone won't work? Great. Do we have another person who would like to ask I mean, I have 1,000 questions, but yeah, maybe in the meantime, we'll get one question from Nebulinda Florence, please.
Thank you, Matthew.
Yes,
Lorian, thank you for the wonderful talk. Today you hear very often, you know, the cliche, if you're not at the table, you're part of the meal. And all marginalized groups, not just the undocumented, you know, we understand the importance of both being there and being seen. So I think what most undermines the campaign for undocumented citizens or our companions or la familia is that they're not there to speak for themselves. They're afraid to speak in case you're incriminating yourself. Somebody has to speak on your behalf, or you have to wait until you get legal status. But when you get legal status, you always have family behind, you know? You don't want to compromise other people just because you've made it to the States. So it's almost as though, you know, somebody says, you know, run, and your feet are tied. Where do you run? How can you run? And I can just imagine the emotional burden of parents who try to keep it a secret, you know, not let their children know that they are undocumented, you know. And some of my students, you know, will find out, you know, when they're in college or when they're applying for college. But it's a self-damning system that, you know, cuts down your legs and then says run. And there's nowhere to go and you can't even move. But thank you for the lovely talk.
Thank you so much for that comment. I feel like you really conveyed poignantly the vulnerability and the precarity of the position of undocumented people and the importance of acting in solidarity.
Yes, absolutely. Professor Fox, are you able to, looks like you might have a new setup, or?
The question's in the comments, Matt.
Oh, it is? I couldn't actually, oh, there it is. Great, it just showed up. Okay, so Professor Fox says, also cross-disciplinary over here. Thank you for the talk. We are sitting here talking about young people themselves, and in response to Professor Okume's question, themselves are context of diminished citizenship every day, with hardship, yes, but also with strength, agency, wisdom, savvy, making strategic decisions throughout the day, in school, and beyond. And this is from the class. So I don't know if you'd like to respond to that comment at all. Yes.
I love that comment. I think it's absolutely important to point to the resilience and creativity and agency of people who are navigating an unjust system. And I love that. I love that comment celebrates that, and I want to be a part of that celebration. This paper was making a claim that, you know, I had to demonstrate by showing hardship, but I think that there's value definitely, in showing that in spite of all of these barriers, people persist.
Yes, thank you both for emphasizing that. Professor Campos, would you like to ask a question? Yes.
Sure. Thank you, Lori, again for being with us and for this excellent presentation. I guess I have two questions. One, you can choose to answer either or both briefly. One is if you have experienced or noticed, or if you have thought about the impact of your argument and the importance of your argument, not just to generate interest or empathy or solidarity from those who don't or not concerned with the hardships, the diminished citizenship of these U.S. citizens, but also the importance of your work so that students and children, or in general U.S. citizens who are suffering from this diminished citizenship, can articulate their own case. So sometimes you're living something, but you don't know exactly how to articulate it. I don't know if you've thought about it, but it seems to me that one of the impacts of works like yours is helping people who are undergoing those hardships understand them and articulate them. So I wonder, that's a very general question, if you have thought or witnessed that impact. The other one is thinking of Professor Fox's class and of their wonderful sort of an important comment is what might be if you know, because you have a lot of also empirical research, what might make the difference between the US citizens with undocumented parents who are still able to thrive or to, strive in spite of all the difficulties, and the ones that maybe suffer irreparable or long-term harm in ways that they can't thrive?
Oh, good questions. So I have some thoughts about the first one. Part of what I wanted to do was to help people whom my paper describes feel seen. That maybe this particular group of people has a kind of set of experiences that hasn't really been described and sort of articulated framed in this particular way, and that maybe this description will point up a phenomenon that was previously sort of inchoate and kind of hard to articulate. But now, having this discussion of diminished citizenship, I think this project is just a piece of a larger, this paper is a piece of a larger project where, then we can ask things like, well, is diminished citizenship an injustice? And if so, on what grounds? And if so, how can we resist it? Would change to certain policies make a difference? Is it reasonable to expect that that everybody experience full citizenship in the exact same way? So I think that even though the paper has a sort of limited scope, it is doing work that would allow some of the more resistant piece to come into play. With regard to whether there's data about what makes the difference in, I don't know. Basically, I in my personal experience, I couldn't point to a single thing of the many people that I admire, second generation immigrants who have experienced really difficult things and nonetheless are, heroic in my mind. I couldn't explain how it happens, but it seems like it's really important question.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you so much for that response. Jesus, we have time for one more question. It'd be great to have it from you.
Thank you, Matthew. Professor Gallegos, thank you so much for your presentation. It really validates a lot of the experiences that I have working with young people in the office here at the Immigrant Student Success. And I wanted to point out that I get to work with some citizens who come from parents that got deported. They go back to the country, and when they do come back, they are coming to a brand new world, right? And they're experiencing the same impact and the same kind of feeling as immigrants who may be undocumented, as you point out, right? So it's rebuilding their citizenship. I think it's, a nice way to say in terms of what you present. And then we're talking about those young people that are here who are relentless, that are, fearless, who are pushing forward in their, claim to become citizens, and they claim to be, rightfully here. No matter what. So I think it's an important conversation. I think it's really great that you are facilitating this visibility, and the humanization of immigrants is so important to kind of change hearts and to get people to think about. I know Professor Alonso mentions a lot about political science and political scientists and philosophers, right? And I think each of the roles really bring at different parts of the argument, right? They facilitate this movement to continue. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank everybody here for this conversation.
Thank you so much for the comment and for the notion of rebuilding citizenship. I think that's such a powerful idea that I'm grateful for learning about it.
On that wonderful note, I think we should stop for tonight, and we've taken your time, and we really appreciate your sharing your work with us and your insights. So thank you so much, Professor Gallegos. Everyone is clapping, and I'll turn it over to.
Thank you.
Yes.
And if I can just jump in 1 second, because I want to thank Professor Gallego for sharing your smarts, your analysis, your work with us. But I also want to acknowledge that what you've done tonight is also to provide us with a model about how to do philosophy in a way that is engaged, in a way that is rooted in, the moral concerns, but also rooted in the experiences in the lives of the most marginal, the most vulnerable, the most abused among us, right? Those who the law brutalized. We're really talking here about communities, webs of interdependency that are being brutalized and broken by the law. And you gave us a model about how to do that work and how to understand the impact of those laws on these lives. And I think that's an important model for our students, but also for us as scholars, especially if we want to build a more empathetic and a more just society. So thank you so much, Professor Gallegos, for sharing and teaching us and being with us. I think these comments are also true of the other speakers in this series, Professor Serena Parek and Ariana Peruzzi, who also share with us not just their scholarship, but a model of how to do scholarly work that is rooted in questions of justice and seeing those who get brutalized by our society. I also want to make sure to thank the Department of Philosophy for bringing us together, Daniel Campos, Matt Lindauer, and I want to acknowledge the faculty who have been with us. Professor Okome, my colleague in political science, who's been with us throughout the whole series, Professor Fox, who joined us tonight. I want to acknowledge the students who joined us and contributed to our conversation. This has been a highlight of my semester. I have looked forward to learning from our speakers and from the conversation. So I just wanted to make sure to acknowledge everyone who's been part of this ongoing conversation and really this ongoing work. So thank you so much.
Thank you for all of your work on this, Gaston. We really appreciate you. Thank you.
And thank you, Professor Lindauer, for being with us. And thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.